We begin today's shiur 4 lines from the top of Daf Yud Gimel. You will notice we have a crown shape around the word masnisin. This is a continuation of a marking that we started in our previous shiur, back on Daf Yud Beis, when we indicated that there are a series of mishnayos in which you see a machlokes on the one hand, Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Ozer, versus Rabbi Yoshua, whether or not to believe a woman in her claims against what her husband claims. And each Mishnah features a new type of claim. The practical outcome of these claims is regarding the amount that the husband will have to or not have to pay toward the Kesubos. On the side of our Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel, at the upper part of the page in the margin, you see the word nosei. The nosei represents the topic heading. And we've written, Orus hatoyein al arusoso drusas ishat kodem sherastich. A husband who claims that his wife was involved in harlotry before he wedded her, V'hi toenes negdo, and she counterclaims shemukas eitz, that she was lost her psulim because of impact with some foreign substance like a piece of wood, but not because of her intimacy with another man. Gemara muvah machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Ozer. There will be an Amoraic machlokes in the Gemara. Be'inyan schum haksuva dechol echot tohen. How much is each one actually claiming as far as how much the Kesubos should be? So now we read the Mishnah. He omeres mukas eitzani. She says that her loss of virginity was as a result of impact with some other substance. V'hu omer, and the husband claims, lo ki ela drusas ishat. No, you were involved with intimacy before I married you, and that's how you lost your virginity. Rabban Gamliel of Rabbi Ozer omrim nemenes, they grant her believability. Rabbi Yoshua omer lo pianu chayim. This phrase we saw in the previous Mishnah. This is a phrase that you see repeated in each one of these Mishnayos that we already noted as a series. And he says we don't live according to her words, meaning we don't believe her. Elo harei zu becheskas drusas ish. She's considered having the status of someone who was with another man, ad shetovi raya lidvaran, until she can bring proof to substantiate her claim. The Gemara, Tanasehu b'mai. Each one, the woman and the man, what are they claiming with regard to how much the Kesubos should be? Rabbi Yochanan omer b'masayim umona. Rabbi Yochanan says that when she says mukas eitzani, she's going for the entire bank, meaning she's going for the full amount of the Kesubos, meaning 200 zuz. This is the amount that the Kesubos of a virgin, of a basula, would be. And Rabbi Ozer Omar b'mona v'lo klum. Let's just go back with regard to Rabbi Yochanan b'masayim. And mona means 100 zuz. This is the amount that the husband, in his claim, by saying you were with another man before I married you, and others, you lost your virginity through intimacy. He is saying, therefore, I will owe you no more than 100 zuz. We continue in the Gemara. Rabbi Ozer Omar, the opponent of Rabbi Yochanan, says b'mona v'lo klum. She is claiming a Kesubos of only 100, and he is claiming that I do not owe you anything. Rabbi Yochanan Omar b'masayim umona. Now we analyze Rabbi Yochanan's approach. The 200 versus 100. How does he come up with these numbers? Sovar lo Rabbi Meir. The Tana of our Mishnah is of the opinion of that of Rabbi Meir. He holds like Rabbi Meir. Now what Rashi emphasizes, it's not that Rabbi Yochanan holds. It's rather Rabbi Yochanan is saying that the author of our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Meir. The Omar bein hikir ba bein lo hikir ba mosayim. A husband that discovers that his wife is not a basula, whether he knew she was a mukas eitz beforehand or not, therefore that doesn't make a difference, according to Rabbi Meir, as far as the amount toward her ksuba. It'll be 200. If we look in Rashi, Kosovar Rabbi Yochanan, Konsa b'cheskas besula, v'nimtzeis beula, yesh lo mona, hilko hakorchoch mukatzeis demasisin Rabbi Meir hi, diamar mosayim, v'hu omer jusas isha, v'yesh lo mona. As far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, a man who marries a woman and it turns out that she is a mukas eitz, whether he knew about it before or not, she is entitled to a ksuba of 200. That's how that's how Rabbi Yochanan comes up with the figure of 200 as far as her claim is concerned. And we continue. Rabbi Ozer Omer b'mona v'lo klum, Sovar lo k'Rabbanan. Rabbi Ozer says that the Tana of our Mishnah holds that the amount is based on the opinion of the Rabbanan, not Rabbi Meir. The Amri, according to the Rabbanan who argue with Rabbi Meir, vein hikir ba, vein lo hikir ba mona, whether he knew she was a mukas eitz ahead of time or not, the maximum she can get is 100. It could very well be that as far as a method of analyzing or explaining the difference between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim regarding the mukas eitz, according to Rabbi Meir, he's interested when you're dealing with a woman that lost her virginity. The fact that she lost her virginity is not of prime importance. It's more how she lost it. And if it was not through intimacy, she's considered as if she hasn't lost her virginity in terms of the sum for the ksuba. So the Rabbi Meir is more interested in the how. And the Rabbanan, though, are more interested in the what. Is she a virgin or not? Does she still have the physical signs of virginity or not? And therefore, according to the Rabbanan, if she's mukas eitz, she doesn't have the signs. She's not a virgin. And therefore, she gets only 100. Now, we continue in the Gemara. Bishlama, now we have a new marking, the triangle, and it highlights the expression Bishlama Rebbe Ozer. You see it here, and you see it in a few lines. That at first glance, Rebbe Ozer's analysis of their claims would appear to be more likely, more understandable. Bishlama Rebbe Ozer lo komar Rabbi Yochanan. It's easier to follow Rebbe Ozer's approach and not that of Rabbi Yochanan. The kamuki lo k'Rabbanan. He sets up the Mishnah as in accordance with the Shlita of the more popular opinion, the majority opinion of the Rabbanan, as opposed to Rabbi Yochanan's approach, which set up the Mishnah in accordance with the singular opinion of Rabbi Meir. Elo Rabbi Yochanan my time lo amar Rabbi Ozer. Why did Rabbi Yochanan not choose to follow the path of Rabbi Ozer? The Gemara answers. Kosovar. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that konsa b'cheskas besula v'nimtzeis beula yesh lo ksuba mona. A man who takes in a woman, who marries a woman thinking she's a besula, and then it turns out that she is a beula, she gets a ksuba of only 100. Hacha hu dekamar mona. In this case, she is saying that she gets 100. Once again, Hocha hu ka'omar mona. Here, he, the husband, when he says drusas ish. Well, again, as far as Rabbi Yochanan is concerned, a man who takes in a woman thinking she's a psula and it turns out that she's been involved with intimacy, she gets a ksuba of 100. So when the man is claiming in our Mishnah that she's a drusas ish, she would get 100. V'hi ka'omra mona. And she's saying mukas eitz, and if you set up the Mishnah like the Rabbanan, a mukas eitz also gets 100. So he's claiming 100, she's claiming 100. Ma'iko bein taino didei le taino dida. What is the difference between, why are they arguing? What's the difference between his claim and her claim? Therefore, since there's obviously a difference between his claim and her claim, Rabbi Yochanan could not have set up the Mishnah in accordance with the Rabbanan. He had to set up the Mishnah in a way that when she says mukas eitz, her claim is greater than that which the husband is willing to offer. And since we know that what the husband is willing to offer is 100, her claim when she says mukas eitz must be of 200. And that can be only if you set up the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe Meir, who holds that a mukas eitz gets 200. Bishlama, we continue again. Bishlama, Rebbe Ozer, Hainu de Katani Tarti. If you accept Rebbe Ozer's analysis, we appreciate why we have two Mishnahs, specifically the Mishnah on Yud Beis Amid Beis and our Mishnah that we just learned. Chado la'afuke midarami bar chamo v'chado la'afuke midarav chia bar ovin omer of sheshes. Each Mishnah has a role to play as far as Rebbe Ozer is concerned. One is to dispense or dispel the opinion of Rami Bar Chama, and the other Mishnah's role is to dispel the opinion of Reb Chia Bar Ovin Omer of Sheshes. Now, what did they say? Truth is, we've learned them already, but there is the tendency on the part of each one of us to forget details, and hence Rashi comes to the rescue. We look at Rashi. Bishlamo Rebbe Ozer Domer Drusas Ish Ein Lo Klum. Rebbe Ozer, who explained that when the husband here is saying Drusas Ish, you are Drusas Ish, and therefore you get nothing. So we continue in the Rashi. We're going to read a couple of Rashis now. Hainu de Kotoni Tarti Bovi B'Masnisen. There are two sections of Mishnayos, Gabi Plukta de Mamona, in which you see the couple arguing over money matters. How much is the Kesuba? On Yud Beis Amid Beis, he omeres misharastani ne'anasti, and the Mishnah here, v'hi omeres mukas eitzani. Those are two Mishnayos where in each one the woman makes a specific claim. On Yud Beis Amid Beis, she said that after you married me, I was raped, and the Mishnah which says I lost my virginity because of impact. Chado lafuke medarami bar chama. And we saw the other Mishnah to dispel the opinion of Rav Chia, and Rashi explains, he delineates everything. The Mishnah on Yud Beis Amid Beis, where it said, "He omeres misharastani nasti," Tana, the Tana taught that case lemisni ba, in order to insert in his counterclaim in that Mishnah, v'hoya mekchi mekachtos legamri mashma. The husband's counterclaim there was one of, and I thought you were a basula and you turn out to be a baula. The ain, and it's a mekachtos, means it's a mistaken deal. The ain lo klum. The Mishnah had that as part of its agenda to make sure that you see the husband saying and therefore you get nothing. What's the point? Lafuke midrav Chia bar Ovin, to dispel his approach. The Amar Liel konsebecheskas besula v'nim says bulo yesh lo ksuba mona. That a man who thinks she's a basula and it turns out that she's a bu'ula, that she's been participant in intimacy, she does get a ksuba. So the Mishnah on Yud Beis Amid Beis wanted to dispel that idea using the phrase of Hare v'hoya mekli mekachtos, indicating that the husband's point is you get nothing. So that's reason the Mishnah Yud Beis Omid Beis was taught. The Tana, he Omeres Mukas Eitzani, and the Mishnah here on Yud Gimel Manaf that we learned already, where she says, I am the victim of impact. La'afuke midorami bar chama diyomer le'el gabi mukas eitz, where Rami bar Chama taught back on Daf Yud Aleph, avol lo hikir bo divrei hakol v'lo klum, where if a man married a woman and he didn't know ahead of time that she was a mukas eitz, she had lost her virginity, everyone would agree she gets nothing. You see from our Mishnah that that's not the case. She's claiming I'm a mukas eitz. Obviously she's not saying I get nothing. She's claiming that she gets something. So as far as the need for this Mishnah, we understand that its role is to dispel Rami bar Chama's point of view. So as far as Rebbe Ozer is concerned, we can account for the two Mishnayos, Yud Beis and Beis, and the Mishnah we learned already. We continue in the Gemara. Elo the Rabbi Yochanan tarti lomali. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, what do you need the two Mishnayos for? Now let's go back to Rashi. Elo the Rabbi Yochanan diomar konsa becheskas besula v'nimseis beula. A man who thought she was a virgin and it turned out she had experienced intimacy. Yesh lo ksuba mona. She is entitled to a ksuba of 100. Im kain mai mekachtos dikotani. What is intended by the expression that we saw in the Mishnah on Yud Beis and Beis, v'hoya mechi mekachtos? What does that mean? Amosaya, meaning it's a mistake that instead of what I thought you would get is 200, you get only 100. Avamona yeshla, but you do get 100. Loma li lemisni klal lalahi. If that's the bottom line, that the husband's claim is you deserve 100. Ilashminen plukta de Rab Gamliel Rabbi Yeshua bebori v'shema v'uki mamona v'cheskes marei. If the point of that Mishnah, when it says v'hoyo mechi mekachtos, as far as Rabbi Yochanan is concerned, that you are entitled to some, just not all, you're entitled to 100 instead of 200. So what would the point of teaching that Mishnah be? To feature the machlokes tanoim, where you've got Rabban Gamliel on the one hand versus Rabbi Yeshua on the other hand, where Gamliel says that if you have a claim of Bori versus Shema, on the one hand, that means the woman's claim of Bori and the husband's claim of Shema, and Rabban Gamliel believes her because of the Bori versus the Shema, and on the other you've got Rabbi Yeshua's opinion that says no, we keep the money where it is, that's in the husband's possession. Listni chada, then let the author of the Mishnayos here, listni chad, teach just one Mishnah, lafuki midorami bar chama ulashmin pluktayu, where you could have had taught just the Mishnah with mukas eitz, our Mishnah right here on Yud Gimel, where you see that she does get something, that would effectively dispel Rami bar Chama, and you would also be showing us the machlokas between Rabbi Gamliel versus Rabbi Yeshua, as our Mishnah does. In other words, according to Rabbi Yochanan, where the term mekachtos is not coming to say that you get nothing, which would in effect dispel Rav Chia bar Oven's approach. No, we're not coming to dispel that. All we're interested in doing is dispelling Rami bar Chama's approach. Teach just one Mishnah, and that would have given us all the necessary information. You would have conveyed the idea that mukas eitz does get something, and you would have also featured the machlokas tanoim, all in one Mishnah. We turn back to the Gemara. The last one on the line you can see is underlined. Chada, I need these two Mishnayos, Yud Beis Amid Beis, and the Mishnah here on Yud Gimel. Chada lo diach hakoicha de Rabban Gamliel. One, to show us how far Rabban Gamliel goes. Namely, that a taina of Bori will win over even against a chazaka. And actually, the Gemara will elaborate on what we mean over here to show us how far Rav Gamliel goes in another two lines. V'chado lo diacha koicha de Rabbi Yeshua. And the other Mishnah is to show us how far Rabbi Yeshua goes. The Gemara now explains. Kol Maisa, the Mishnah where she said, Mishir Astani Nenasti, after you married me, I was raped. Lo diacha koicha de Rabbi Yeshua, to show us how far Rabbi Yeshua goes. The Afagav, the Iko Lemeimar Migu, even though she had a stronger claim, she could have said that I am a mukas eitz, and she would have been able to be kosher to the kahuna. And she says something that causes her own. She causes herself a certain loss, in that she passes herself to the kahuna by saying that after I was married I was raped. That would render her unfit to the kahuna. She says, and so that even though she has a claim with amigu to it, amigu means a potential better claim, we still don't believe her. That's Rabbi Yeshua's approach. You see how far Rabbi Yeshua goes? That even though she has a very strong claim, we don't believe her. Lo mehem, no, we don't believe her. Basraisa, the Mishnah of Mukas Eitzani, lo diacha koicha de Rabbi Gamliel, to show us how far Rabbi Gamliel is willing to go. The afagav de lekol meimar migu mehem, no, even though she is saying the best possible claim, she's not suggesting to us, listen, you should believe me because I could have said something even better for myself. No, she's saying the maximum type claim for herself right now by saying she's a mukas eitz, and still Rabbi Gamliel is willing to believe her, even though she's, as we said, she doesn't have this added feature of a migu. A migu is that type of claim where a person says, believe me with what I'm saying because I could have said something that would have even been more beneficial or more believable. Nevertheless, in this Mishnah you see how far Rabbi Gamliel goes in believing her. Now, let us glance at the side of the Gemara. We have a nosei klali, a general heading, a general topic, ad sof haperek, until the end of the perek. HaGemara tidon, the Gemara will evaluate, will analyze, bebirur kashrus ha'isha likahuna, leor hisoirus sibois l'chashad bilos asuros. Is a woman going to be considered fit to marry a Kohen, who, we should point out, has a higher standard as to who is eligible to marry? The kahuna in general is a category in which we find more mitzvahs, more stringencies, and hence there are limitations to whom a Kohen can marry, more so than you find by rank and file members of the Jewish people. And here we're going to encounter situations where there are problems or suspicions that arise regarding the woman, and those suspicions lead to possible restrictions regarding her kashrus, meaning her eligibility to marry a Kohen. The Mishnah. We open up this Mishnah with an unmarried woman, a penuya. And we also note that in this Mishnah you'll see Roman numeral 1 and later Roman numeral number 2. 2 parts, 2 cases. Ra'ua medaberes im echad. Here we'll translate literally, but you have to realize immediately that the literal translation is not enough for understanding the Mishnah. She was seen speaking with a man. V'omru lo ma tivo shel ish zeh, and we asked her, what's the nature of this man? And she says, ish ploni v'kohen, who he's a kosher individual. Kohen is a borrowed expression, meaning he's of pure genealogy, and therefore he wouldn't affect me in any negative way. Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer omrim ne'emenes, she is believed, and that would mean she is keshera to the kahuna. Rabbi Yeshua Omer lo mi pianu chayim, as we've seen already several times, we don't live by her words. And areizu becheskas beula lenosinu lemamzer ad shetovi rayal devar. And we therefore, in our non-believing of her statement, we have to consider her as if she had intimacy with disqualifying individuals. And nosin and mamzer, these are people that if they would have intimacy with a woman, their intimacy disqualifies her to the kahuna. until she would bring proof to her claim. Hoisamu beres, a woman is met and she is pregnant. V'yamru law, and we ask her, Mativa shel ubar zeh, what's the nature of this child, of the fetus? And she says, well, me'ish ploni v'kohen, who I was impregnated by a kosher type individual. Rav Ozer omrim ne'emenes, she's a believer. B'shomer lo mipi anu chaim, we don't live by her words. Elo harezu b'cheskas muberes l'nosin and mamzer. We suspect that she was impregnated by a nosin and mamzer. These are people that would render the child unfit if they in fact fathered the child. And they would be, if it's a girl, for example, that's born, she would not be able to marry into the kuna until she can bring proof to what she claims, that the father is a kosher person. My medaber. So here we immediately focus on translating the second word of the Mishnah. We found her medaberes. What does that mean, medaberes? The topic heading on the side introduces this Gemara by saying, Mishnah Seinu Mevia Shnei Mikrim Shel Hisorus Chashad. Our Mishnah presented two cases where an issue of suspicion arises. Kan Cholkim Rav Ziri Rav Asi Al Pirush Mikra Harishon Roa Medaberes. We'll see now Rav Ziri and Rav Asi arguing as to what was the first case, what actually happened there. So now going back to the Gemara, after the Gemara asks, "My medaberes," Ziri Omar Nistara. Nistara means she was seen going into private with a man, but we didn't see an actual act of intimacy. Rashi says, "Nistara v'afal pi shelo ro'ua shenivala nifsalikuna l'Rabbi Yeshua l'kamon demal's b'yuchsin." Rashi is revealing points that the Gemara makes later on, but for our purposes, what we want to emphasize is, according to Ziri, we didn't see actual intimacy, but it's enough that she went into private with a man that gives basis for Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah saying that she loses her kashrus status, her status of acceptability to the kahuna. The next opinion, Rav Asi, Omar Niv'allah, the Mishnah says, Ro Medaberes really means she was seen in an actual act of intimacy with some man. We saw in the Mishnah that she claims the unidentified man as being a kosher individual, and again, Rabbi Yeshua says we're not going to rely on her claims. Now, as we go on in the Gemara, you see we have a new geometric form, and on the side of the Gemara, you'll see that we have a diamond and a squiggle underline. Hadgoshas bishlam aziri. Each time, the Gemara is going to say that things would seem to work out better for Zeiri's approach. Now, the double underline also appears in the marking scheme, and it's used to emphasize the expression Hainu de Kotoni Tarti. It's with this that we can appreciate why two cases were taught. This expression Hainu de Kotoni Tarti, you'll see continues when we get to Omid Beis. You see 6 lines from the top. Again, you see a Bishlama L'Zeiri expression, and later on the Omid you see again Kotoni Mihas Tarti, which is essentially the same marking, which highlights this idea that 2 cases were taught. So why did the Mishnah feature 2 cases? So now we continue with the Gemara itself, after having mapped out the structure. Bishlomo Zeiri Hainu de Kotoni Medaberes. According to Zeiri, that said, we saw her Medaberes, and Zeiri said we saw her going into privacy. So the word Medaberes is understandable. We saw her talking and going into private with someone. L'Rav Asi, which, by the way, this dash underline you see is used to highlight this the turnaround in the Gemara. Well, what about Rav Asi? But according to Rav Asi, my medaberes, the Rav Asi's explanations was the witnesses saw an act of intimacy. What does medaberes have to do with intimacy? Medaberes, as we said, that's a term that people are seen talking in private. Okay, that's a legitimate turn of phrase. But what is medaberes of the Mishnah? How does that relate to the Rav Asi explanation that we saw her in an act of intimacy? The Gemara says, Lishna ma'alya. It's simply a euphemism. And we find euphemisms for intimacy, as we see in the following pasuk. It says she ate and she wiped her mouth and she says, I did nothing wrong. But what the pasuk is actually describing is intimacy. And what word does it use? Ochla, she was eating. A euphemism. So we see that euphemisms are used to describe what is actually an act of intimacy. With regard to Ze'iri, things work out well. I understand why there was need for teaching two cases. Medaberes, Umuberes. One was a case where we saw her go into simply private, and the other was a case where we saw an actual act of intimacy. And Rashi elaborates here and says, the two cases, the case of Medaberes shows us how far Rabbi Yeshua goes, meaning, even though we didn't see an actual act of intimacy, Rabbi Yeshua renders her unfit to the Kona. And we see the case of Muberes where we know she was involved with intimacy, and yet Rabbi Gamliel is willing to give her a clean report. So as far as Ziri is concerned, I appreciate why there were the purpose, the significance of having two cases. Rav Asi tarti lomali. According to Rav Asi, what do I need two cases which in effect are really the same? They're both cases where we are aware with certainty of intimacy. The Gemara answers, Chado lahachshir ba. One of the cases is taught to show, let's say, reflect the on the side of Rav Gamliel that she is herself kosher to marry a Kohen. The Chado lahachshir bebita, and the other case is to show that if the child that's born from we'll call it the unknown father, based on the mother's claim, the child is also kosher to marry into the kahuna. So I need two sections of the Mishnah, one to say the mother is kosher, and the other to say that the child is kosher. And we should point out that it's not enough to tell us that the mother is kosher, because the mother had what's called a cheskas kashrus. She was known before any doubts arose anyway to be a kosher woman for the kahuna. Therefore, it's important to teach regarding the child as well. The child who has not been born yet, so she didn't achieve a known status. The Gemara continues. This answer, as far for Rav Asi, is fine, is an acceptable answer according to one of two opinions that we haven't seen here, but there is a machlokis on this matter, and according to the opinion of Divrei HaMachshir Bo, Machshir B'Bita, there is an opinion that says that if the mother is kosher, the daughter is kosher. But there is an opinion that says that even though we can machshir the mother, we cannot machshir the child. The child does not have a status of kashrus. So then what am I to say about the need for two sections in the Mishnah? I can't say that the second case in the Mishnah is there to teach me about the kashrus of the daughter. The Gemara answers very simply. Rav Asi savar kemadamar ledivrei hamachshir bo machshir bita. Rav Asi happens to subscribe to the opinion that says if the mother is kosher, the daughter is also considered kosher. Omar le Rav Papa le Abaye. L'Zeiri de Omar, my medaberes nishtara, according to Zeiri, that said the word medaberes in the Mishnah went into private. The Omar Rabbi Yeshua lo mehemna, and the Tana in our Mishnah Rabbi Yeshua says, well, since she went into private with an unknown man, she is not believed, and she's considered niv'eles. She's considered as if actual intimacy with someone that's puzzle. But is it not so that Ha'omar Rav Malkin al Hayichud v'ein Oisrin al Hayichud? Rav in another place says that Yichud is the same thing as Nistros, going into private. That if a woman is seen going into private, a married woman is seen going into private, we will give her a rabbinic penalty of lashing. We call it rabbinic lashing. However, that married woman that was seen going into private is not considered as if she had intimacy with the man. Ein Ozer al Yichud means we don't declare that married woman to be forbidden to her husband. The din is, the halach is that a married woman who has intimacy with another man, so she's forbidden to be with her husband. But for merely going into private, we don't view her as if she had intimacy with that guy. So now we have, according to Zeiri, we have a Mishnah, and focusing on Rebbe Yoshua, that says that her going into private is tantamount, it's considered by halacha that she did have intimacy with that guy, and that thought makes her unfit to the kahuna. But Rav says that going into intimacy is halachically not viewed as if she went all the way and had intimacy. So lema delo karebi Yoshua. Should we say that Rav then is not, Rav is an Amora, and that his opinion does not conform to the Tanaic opinion of Rabbi Yeshua? The Gemara says afilu temo Rabbi Yeshua. Rav's opinion is something that Rabbi Yeshua also can accept. However, here we're dealing with the woman's acceptability to the kahuna, a very specific issue. It's a stringency that's imposed with regard to matters of yuchas and genealogy, specifically with regard to the kahuna. So that with regard to the kahuna, so we consider it if she had actual intimacy. But in general, even Rabbi Yeshua will concede to that which Rav says, or that she is not viewed as actually having had intimacy with regard to forbidding her to her husband. We continue in the Gemara with a new geometric form, and under the Mivneh heading, the volcano shape or trapezoid are kushios mimakoros al Rav Asi. We're now going to be attacking Rav Asi's approach from Tanaic sources. So you notice that there's a question here, and when you look at Omid Beis, you notice about a third of the way down the page there's a meisvei, a question that's presented to him from another Tanaic source. Meisvei. Maybe before we go ahead, just let's remind ourselves that Rav Asi said that the medaberes of the Mishnah we saw her in an actual act of intimacy. Meisvei. Ro'ua shenichnasa im echad l'seiser. We at the top of Omid Beis, l'chorba. There are two cases. We saw her going in with somebody, an unknown guy, l'seiser. And l'seiser, Rashi says, is mashma yichud b'alma, simply going into privacy, into seclusion with some guy. The top of Omid Beis, l'chorba. Chorba is a ruin. Then here Rashi says that a churba, when we speak about a woman going into a churba, you can assume that it's a reference to intimacy. The Omru law, and we asked the woman, Ma tivo shalish zeh, what's the nature of this guy that you were with? Kohenu uben achi abahu. She answers, oh, he's a kosher individual. The actual translation is not important for us right now. What's important is to note that she's claiming that the fellow was a type of person whose intimacy with me would not render me unfit. Rabbi Ozer Omer ne'emenes, Rabbi Shua Omer lo mipi anu chayim elo harezu becheskas be'ulu l'nosenu l'mamzer ad shetovi la'raya l'dvorah. The same expression we've seen so many times already today. Rasul Ramliel says she is believed, and Rabbi Yeshua says no. Bishlama l'zi'iri Hainu dekotoni tarti. According to Zeiri, I can appreciate why we have two cases taught: l'seiser o l'churba. Remember, Zeiri said that the machlokes tanoim between HaRav Ozer versus Rabbi Yeshua applies even in a case where we see her going into mere seclusion, namely, even without our having seen an actual act of intimacy. So this Tanaic source features two cases that mirror those two situations: seclusion and actual intimacy. Elol Rav Asi diomar nivalo, but according to Rav Asi, that says that the machlokes tanoim applies only in a case where there's actual intimacy, but not in a case where there's simple seclusion. Tarti lomali, what's the purpose of having two cases? We have l'seiser o l'churba. The Gemara says there aren't two cases. Chad al-koton, there's only one case. L'seiser, the churba, she went into private in a ruin. And we said that a ruin is a place of intimacy, where intimacy takes place. Question, Vaha l'seiser o l'churba kotoni. The language of the source indicates two separate cases. The Gemara answers, okay, you're right. They're two separate cases, but they're both situations of intimacy. Chada l'churba de masa, v'chada l'churba de dabro. One is a ruin in a community, in a settled area, and the other is a ruin. De dabro means in a field, in an outlying area. Utsrichi. And I need to feature both scenarios. Note, we have a long answer here. De'i ashmina and churba de masa. Had we taught that case, a woman was seen going into a ruin, and again, we say going into a ruin is tantamount to having seen her in an act of intimacy. And if we had taught the case of churba de masa, churba, a ruin in a city, there, and maybe only there, Rabbi Gamliel would say she's kosher mishum deroiv ksher metzlah, because in a city, and we'll assume for our discussion we're talking about a Jewish city, the majority of men that are there are people that would not render her unfit to the kahuna. But a ruin that's out in an outlying area, that's exposed to all kinds of people, even people that are Gentiles, that would render her unfit to the kahuna. The rov psulim etzla, the majority of the people in the outlying areas are people that would render her unfit to the kuna. Amo, I would have thought, Molda lay le Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Gamliel would concede to Rabbi Yeshua that there we would not believe her claim of kashrus. V'yashmina b'yin, had he taught only one case, the case of churba de dabra, the ruin in a field, b'hikam Rabbi Yeshua, there maybe only then would Rabbi Yeshua say she's not believed and is rendered unfit. But in the case of churba de masa, Rabbi Yeshua would concede to Rabbi Gamliel. Therefore, I have to teach both cases, that in both cases each Tanaic opinion maintains their grounds. Meisvei. We have a question. I'll note there's a long question ahead of us. The structure is worth noting ahead of time. There's a starred note on the side. Yesh l'tzayin, we're reading our starred note. Yesh l'tzayin, we should point out, Shagmar Meviyah Braisa, The Gemara will quote a Tanaic source, Shebekriya Rishona Chasras Havana. Upon our first reading, it's not understandable, especially the second half of the source is obscure. Bahemshech, Gemara Masbira Habraisa. Afterwards, the Gemara will explain the Braisa. Varak Achakach Magil Lakusha. Then, only after that, we eventually get to the heart of the question. For those of you who don't like to sit in suspense, you can skip down to almost the end of the long question. You can see the double underline. Again, a very helpful marking. Kotoni Mias Tarti. There were two cases taught. Medaberes and Meuberes. Two separate cases. And the case of Meuberes is is separate or in contrast or just to the case of Medaberes. So they're two separate cases. And at that point, it says Tiyufta de Ravasi. This would repudiate Ravasi. In other words, we are showing you that Medaberes is not a euphemism for intimacy. Otherwise, you would have Meuberes, which is also a case of intimacy. You don't need two cases. So from the fact that you see two cases, we are then to understand that Medaberes does not mean actual intimacy, but it means simply going into private. And even under those circumstances, Rabbi Yoshua the Tana would say, as we'll see in this source, that she is rendered unfit. That for mere witnessing her going into seclusion with an unknown man, the Tana Rabbi Yoshua would render her unfit. And that is not like Rav Asi. Just to repeat, according to Rav Asi, her going into mere seclusion would not be enough to render her unfit, even according to Rabbi Yoshua. And here we're going to demonstrate that witnessing her, seeing her go into seclusion, is grounds for rendering her unfit to the guna, according to the Tana Rabbi Yoshua. And now we turn to the beginning of the long question, Meisvei. Zu edus shel isha ksherola. This testimony is a testimony that a woman is believed. Simply that if the woman says, I had intimacy with a kosher man, that information is something we can rely on, and she remains kosher and acceptable to marry a Kohen. For Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Eino Nemenes. She's not believed, and she would not be allowed to marry a Kohen. Omer Lohem Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says to his opponents, would you not concede to me regarding a woman taken into captivity, and there are witnesses that saw her being taken into captivity, and she would claim, I was taken into captivity, and of course you have witnesses that say so, but I remained clean, I remained pure, I was not victimized in intimacy, through intimacy. She'eino ne'emenes. You wouldn't believe her. Amru lo avol. So they said, yes, we agree, you're right, that's true, we would not believe her. So Rabbi Yeshua says back, so you see that you guys are not believing her. Uma hefresh yesh bein zu lazu. What's the difference between the case of being taken into captivity and the case of us having seen her with some other guy and she says he was a kosher guy? Why there are you willing to believe? Answer, lazu yesh aidim. In the case of the captivity, there were witnesses. There were witnesses that saw her being taken into captivity. Lazu ein lo aidim. And in the case of Medaberes, there are no witnesses. Omar lahem af lazu yesh edim sharei kreiso ben shina. Well, in the case of Medaberes, there are also witnesses, says Rabbi Yeshua. You see that her belly is between her teeth. That means, you see, she's pregnant. Amru lo rov ovdei kechovim prutzim ba'rayas heim. Now, we said earlier that this is not meant to make sense at this point. The Gemara has to clarify what is going on. So it's not clear, but if you translate it, it means they said back to him, the majority of idol worshippers engage in harlotry. Omar Lahem, Rabbi Yeshua says back, Eina Petrobus Larayas. There's no guarantor with regard to matters of fidelity. Bamed Vamamurim. When is she said to be believed according to Rabbi Gamliel Be'edus Isha Begufa? That's with regard to testimony that she says that reflects upon herself. But with regard to testimony that would affect her daughter, everyone agrees that the child is a shtuki. Shtuki is a doubt. As we said, I know it sounds sometimes a little repetitious, but here the Gemara spells it out. Mai ka'omar lahu, umai ka'mahadri lei. What did he say to them? And what did they say back to him? We have a subtopic heading on the side. We call the Tat Nosei, where we wrote Shvuya Psula Lakuna, a woman taken into captivity. Everyone agrees is rendered unfit to the kuna. Hayim yesh lahashvosei leha. Are we to compare to that situation, Rawad Shinistro, where we saw one go into private, or Nimseis Muberes, where we find a woman that is pregnant? Are we going to render those situations also the woman being unfit to the kahuna? So now we go back into the Gemara. Hachi ko'amri lei. The following is what the Rabbanon said to Rabbi Yoshua. Hishavtanu al hamu'uberes. You'll notice that we have arrows to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara text, and the arrow we see now is to be associated with the arrow above. And you'll take a look at the Rashi. My Ka'omar, the Rashi we're reading is in the middle of the Rashi column. Klomar, my Ka'omar Lahu Ihu. What did Rabbi Yeshua say to the Rabbanon to call Mehadri Le Inhu that caused them to say to him, Rov Ovdei Kechavim Prutzim Ba'aroyas, that the majority of idol worshippers are involved with immorality. Klum Shuva Hizu Al Mashamar Lahem. Is this a response to that which he said to them? Af Lezu Yesh Eidim. Rabbi Yeshua had said to them, this case also has witnesses. Ein L'cha Porutz Godol Mizeh Kachazino Dinisabru Menu. There's nothing more obviously frivolous than a woman that you see actually pregnant. An unmarried woman that you see impregnated by some unknown guy. What's more porutz than that? So what was going on? What was taking place in the conversation between the Rabban and Rabbi Yoshua? And that's what we're here to clarify. So we read in our Gemara that the Rabbanon, again, I know we've said this a few times already, but the Rabbanon represent like Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer that were willing to believe the woman. Rabbi Yeshua was not willing to believe the woman. So they said to him, Hishavtonu amuberes, you have answered us with a winning type argument regarding the pregnant woman. Namely, just like we concede that when a woman is taken into captivity, it's, as far as we're concerned, it's certain that she was misused by the idol worshipper captors. They had intimacy with her, and therefore we agree she's rendered unfit to the kahuna. What do you think happens with a woman taken into captivity? So Rabbi Yeshua said, look, just like that's the case there, so too a woman who is a single woman who comes in front of us is now pregnant. It's equally obvious that she was impregnated. she was a part of because of her pregnancy. You can see that she was obviously participant in an act of intimacy, and just like we agree, just like we understand that in a case of a captive woman, she is rendered unfit to the kuna, so too in the case of a woman who comes in front of us pregnant. So that's what they said to Rabbi Yeshua above in the source, when Rabbi Yeshua said to them, so too this one has witnesses. Just like in the case of the captive woman, there are witnesses, so too, by the mere fact that she was taken into captivity, and we know that the majority of idol worshippers engage in harlotrous acts, that's tantamount to certainty that she was involved with intimacy. So likewise, the woman who is pregnant, it's 100% sure that she was involved with an act of intimacy. So there we concede to you that the muberes is rendered unfit to the kuna. Ma teshivenu al hamedaberes. What are you going to say? What are you, Rabbi Yeshua, going to answer us with regard to the case of medaberes? Why there do you say that she's rendered unfit? Omar lohem medaberes hainu shvuya. So Rabbi Yeshua says back to them that the case of medaberes is just like the case of shvuya. What does that mean? So Rashi explains across from here, medaberes hainu shvuya, ma medaberes ein lo edim, just like the case of medaberes represents a situation where there are no witnesses. There's no witnesses of actual intimacy. And by the way, here you see already a problem for Rav Asi, because we're saying that the case of medaberes is not a case of actual intimacy. Rav Asi had said medaberes represented a case of actual intimacy. So here you have, just like a case of medaberes, there is no witnesses of actual intimacy. So, and Rabbi Yeshua says to them, that is similar to the case of shvuya, which you agreed she is rendered unfit. So let's go over that again in the Rashi. Medaberes hainu shvuya. Ma medaberes ein lo edim. Shvuya ein lo edim bebe'ilah. In the case of a woman taken captive, we never said that we have witnesses that saw the actual act of intimacy. V'atem machzikim od sokin levalah. And you, Rabbi Gamliel, you people who are willing to give credibility to the woman are willing to concede that in the case of shvuya that she's rendered unfit. So in the case of medaberes also you should concede to me she's unfit. They're one and the same. Omrulo, they said back to him, Shiny shvuya, the case of captivity is different. The rov of the majority of idol worshippers are involved with frivolous and harlotrous acts, and therefore she's considered definitely to have had intimacy. Omar lahem, so Rabbi Yeshua says back to them, Honami kiva distater. Once she goes into seclusion with some man, there's no guarantor that she didn't have actual intimacy. It's as good as a foregone conclusion that she had intimacy. So what we've done till now is we've clarified what was the contents of that discussion between Rabbi Yeshua and his opponents. To summarize, Rabbi Yeshua was trying to make the case that just like his opponents concede to her being rendered unfit in the case of shvuya, so too in the case of muberes, and even in the case where the woman goes into mere seclusion. And on that very point, the opponents were not willing to concede to Rabbi Yeshua. Kotani miyas tarti. Now we have to focus on the immediate agenda of the Gemara. The question focused against Rav Asi. We see in this discussion two separate cases, medaberes umuberes. And it was very clear from our discussion that muberes represented definite intimacy, and medaberes represented a case where there wasn't clear intimacy. Who said that medaberes reflected simple seclusion and not actual intimacy. That we saw by Rabbi. That's what Ziri said. Rav Asi, though, had said that medaberes was a euphemism for actual intimacy. This discussion revealed that medaberes does not mean actual intimacy. Tiyufta de Rav Asi, tiyufta. So from here we see a conclusive refutation of Rav Asi, because in this discussion we see that the Tana Rebbe Yoshua was going to declare her unfit to the kuna, even in a situation where there wasn't actual witnessing of intimacy, where all there was witnessing of her going into seclusion. And even under those circumstances, Rebbe Yoshua declared her unfit to the kuna. Counter to Rav Asi's approach. The Gemara now asks a question that's focused on the Tana Rebbe Yoshua. V'tepuk lei, could Rav Yoshua not have made a distinction between the case of Shivuya and the case of Nistara? He wanted to equate them, but why did he equate them? V'tepuk lei, should Rav Yoshua not have made a distinction? Has dahasam, in the case of the woman taken into captivity, rov psulim, so the majority of the people of the men over there were idol worshippers. They were puzzled. They would render her unfit to the kahuna. In the case of the woman in the Jewish community going into seclusion, rov ksherim etzla, the majority were kosher, and a Jewish man that has a one night stand with an unmarried Jewish woman, that doesn't render her unfit to the kahuna. So that's what we mean when we say rov ksherim etzla. The majority in this case of a woman in a Jewish community going into seclusion, into yichud with some guy, the majority chances are that she would remain kosher. Does Rabbi Yoshua not see that distinction? The Gemara responds, Messiah le Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. What we are seeing here, that Rabbi Yoshua does not make that distinction, supports Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's approach. The Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, l'divrei hamachshir, the Tanaic opinions that say she is kosher, machshir afilu barov psulim, they would say she's kosher even in a situation where the majority of men would be unfit, would render her unfit. How could she remain kosher? So the hesber to the explanation is that she had a cheskas kasher. She was known, she had a status before anything happened as being kosher to the kuna. So the chazaka is a stronger feature, according to the machshir, like Rabbi Gamliel, than the fact that she's in an environment of rov psulim. L'divrei ha-poisel afilu barov ksher, but Rabbi Yoshua, who says she's unacceptable, will say thusly, even in an environment where the majority of people are kosher. Before continuing in the Gemara, we have a new marking, and on the side, the nosei mivneh heading, we feature a crown shape, and the crown highlights the Amoroyim Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Ozer. Machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Ozer im l'divrei hamachshir bo machshirim gam bebita. This machlokas we had made an allusion to before in our Gemara, the earlier part of today's shiur. Omer Rabbi Yochanan l'divrei hamachshir bo machshir bebita. He who was willing to accept the woman's testimony regarding her kashrus, regarding herself and being allowed to marry a Kohen, we'll accept her testimony regarding the child that she is carrying in pregnancy. L'divrei ha-posel ba, posel bebita. Rabbi Yoshua, who says that we don't accept her testimony regarding herself, we don't accept the testimony regarding the kashrus of the child. Either the child is also considered unfit, if she's a girl, to marry a Kohen. Rebbe Ozer Omer L'divrei hamachshir bo posel b'bita. Rebbe Ozer is more restrictive, and if you focus on the dashed underlining, you can see the point of difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Rebbe Ozer. That according to Rebbe Ozer, even the Tanoim that are willing to accept the woman's word with regard to herself, we're not going to accept her word regarding the child that she is carrying in pregnancy. Omar Rabba, my time of the Rebbe Ozer. What's the reason for Rebbe Ozer's restriction? The Gemara answers, the woman herself had a given known status before any doubts arose of being kosher. Bita lesla chazoka de kashrus. The girl, the child that is, that she's the daughter, the fetus, the female fetus that she is carrying, hasn't been born yet. She never achieved a known status. In other words, her whole conception is shrouded in doubt. Eisvei Rebbe Ozer Rebbe Yochanan. A long question. You take note of that. Bamed v'mamurim be'edusisha begufa, avol edusisha bebita divrei kol of lat shtuki. We have a Tanaic source in which we saw quoted earlier. If you have any trouble finding where that was, so you can use the little star that you find to the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara text and work your way up, and you see where there was where this citation was noted earlier. So in the Tanaic source, it says that under what circumstances does Rabbi Gamliel accept the woman's word? That's with regard to her testimony concerning herself. But testimony that she issues regarding her daughter, everyone agrees. Even the lenient opinions regarding the believability of the woman say the vlad is shtuki. My lav shtuki upasul. The term shtuki, you can see in the last parak of Kiddushin, is associated with people that are unfit. Shtuki literally means silence. We don't know who the father is, and therefore the child is considered unfit. Lo shtuki v'kosher. The term shtuki does not mean unfit. There's shtuki. There's an element of doubt. Shtuki indicates doubt, but the child is kosher. Question: Umi shtuki kosher? Is there? It's almost a contradiction in terms. Shtuki kosher. The Gemara answers, yes, there is such a thing. Kiddush Shmuel. The Omar Shmuel Asora Kehanim Oindim Upirish Echad Mehem. There were 10 known kosher individuals, 10 Kehanim. And one of them separated Uboal and had intimacy. One of those 10 known kosher men had intimacy with a woman. Havlat shtuki. The child that's born is called shtuki. My shtuki. What do you mean by that? That we deprive him, literally, we silence him from attempting to inherit his father's property. Pshita, that's obvious. Do we know who the father is? It's one of 10 men, but we don't know specifically who it is. So how in the world would you think that the child could inherit his father's property when he doesn't know who his father is? Ela shemashtikin. What does shtuki mean? Shemashtikin aisei midin kahuna. We silence him from the privileges of kahuna. Rashi explains he cannot serve in the Beis Hamikdash, nor can he eat from truma. Now that is quite a chiddush. We know that his father was a Kohen, yet this child is not entitled to the privileges of kahuna. He's not entitled to work in the Beis Hamikdash, nor is he entitled to eat truma, the tithe that only Kehanim are entitled to eat. The pasuk that teaches us this is as follows: That's the pasuk that wraps it all up with regard to Kehanim. And what do we mean? What does it mean for us? Mi shezar oy myuchas achrav. He whose children are traceable to their father. Yotzazeh, to the exclusion of this one, shein zaro myuchas achrav. You have a child that's born, but he is not traceable to his father. You cannot say that he's miyuchas, that he's connected genealogically to any specific one of these men, and therefore he's called a shtuki. The child himself can if it's a girl that's born under those circumstances, she's kosher to the kahuna. As far as using the term shtuki, that is a reflection of the element of doubt that exists, thereby depriving him from Kohen privileges. Before we continue in the Gemara, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading, the Nosei Orus Varusaso Shemoidim Sheubo Arion Mimenu V'Yeshlach Shu. We have a case of a couple that she is married to him, and they come in front of us, and she's pregnant, and we speak about an Orus. This is a point that we've mentioned many times already since the beginning of the Masechta. But an Orus, an Arusa, is a description of a married woman in the first stage of marriage. This is a stage of marriage before the chuppah, before the canopy ceremony, which in the time of the Gemara was something that took place. The chuppah nisuin stage took place with a time gap after the erusin. So we have a situation, and only after the chuppah, the marriage canopy ceremony, do you have the couple experiencing actual intimacy as man and wife. So here we have a situation where they didn't reach that stage, the second stage of their marriage, and yet she comes in front of us and she's already pregnant. Ha'u orus v'arusaso dasu l'kamei de Rav Yosef. He amra minei. She's saying, I was impregnated by my husband, though we are still at the first stage. We haven't consummated the marriage with the chuppah ceremony, but he is the one that impregnated me, and not some outsider that would render the child a mamzer, but it's him. It's my husband. The hu Omar, and the Orus says in Mino, yes, I am the one that impregnated her. And even though maybe it's not the best thing to have an act of intimacy and the impregnation prior to the nisuin, but the child is kosher if we knew that to be the case. So, Amar Rav Yosef, what's there to suspect over here? Chada deha chamodeh. First of all, he is conceding, I am the one that impregnated her. V'oid ha'omar Rav Yehuda omar Shmuel halacha k'Rav Gamliel. And furthermore, and this implies that even if he wasn't conceding, but we accept Rav Gamliel anyway. The halacha is like Rav Gamliel, that she is believed. That if there happens to be a controversy between them, she would be believed. So Rav Yosef rules that the child is certainly kosher. In Rav Yosef's presentation, as we just explained, he implied that the Vlad would be kosher, the fetus, the child is kosher, even if the husband was not agreeing that he is the one. We continue with the question. It lasts a couple of lines. You can see we have a long question marking. Amar le Abaye Ubeha ki lo modeh mi machshir Rav Gamliel. In a case like this, if the husband did not concede to her, would Rav Gamliel have actually said that the child is kosher? The Amar le Shmuel Rav Yehuda Shinana. Shinana means a wise one or sharp one. Shmuel says to Rav Yehuda, Halacha k'Rav Gamliel. The halacha in general follows Rav Gamliel. V'at lo tavid uvda adika roiv ksherim etzla. V'hacharot psulim etzla. And yet do not rule like Rav Gamliel in accepting the woman's word unless you have a case of rove, the majority of the men in the area are ksherim etzla, are people that would not render her unfit. The hacha means in this case when you have an arusa is a married woman. Rove psulim etzla, the majority of the men around are unfit for her. She's fit only for her husband. She's a married woman. So Abaye's question to Rav Yosef is as follows. You, Rav Yosef, implied that Rabbi Gamliel is willing to believe the woman under all circumstances. Here you see that we don't accept Rabbi Gamliel under all circumstances. In other words, the halacha doesn't follow that. You have to, in addition to the woman's word, you've got to have the situation surrounding her where rove men would be acceptable, meaning would not render her unfit. But in the case of the Orus and Arusa, most of the men would render her unfit. So Rav Yosef responds, Uletamech, and this is a response. It lasts a few lines. Tikshi loch hi gufa. The expression that Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda itself is not clear. He said on the one halacha. Halacha means we follow Gamliel. Gamliel says that you take her word; she's kosher. And then he says va'at lo tavid uvda. Well, and he says don't rule kosher. Don't act upon that. And he qualified it unless you have rov ksherim, but you don't rely on the woman's word. What do you have to say then about what was said? Ha lechatchila, ha di'eved. Lechatchila means what is a first choice situation. If a Kohen would come and ask the Beis Din, can I marry this woman? The Beis Din would say, you cannot marry her based on her word until you have a situation that rov ksherim etzla. That's called lechatchila, first choice. What we would paskin at the outset. Ha di'eved. Then you have the situation of something that's post facto. That if a Kohen married a woman who was shrouded in doubt, and the Kohen didn't come to ask us, we would, assuming that the woman said that she had been with a kosher man, we would not tell the Kohen to divorce her. V'honami, the case that came to me, says Rav Yosef, you have a case of a woman who was impregnated. K'di'evedomi. It's like that post facto situation. She comes to us pregnant, and now the question is, should we render the child unfit and to render the child unfit and to aser the husband from being with her? So we say we're not going to render them unfit. We're not going to aser the husband. Post facto, we go with Rabbi Gamliel's word that if she says she was with a kosher man, and we saw in this case she said that she was impregnated by the husband and the husband conceded, we'll accept that. So we have what's called a b'di'eved situation. So what Abaye was saying to Rav Yosef was in effect as at the end of the Gemara, yes, on a first choice basis, we don't go along the ruling of Rav Gamliel alone that we simply believe her, but we would want to be in a situation where the majority of men that might have been with her would have not rendered her unfit. That's a first choice situation, but in a post facto situation, we will go with her word alone, like Rabbi Gamliel's teaching.